Hi, this is Seamless, and today I'm going to show you how to make this bass. Now, this is a crazy kind of setup. I didn't really start out with the intention of doing what I did, but I did do what I did, and I will show you how I did what I did. So, I'm going to describe what's happening right now, and then I'm going to go step by step over every single thing I'm doing. And I've normally been skipping over stuff that I've talked about before in past videos, but I've noticed that some people don't really go back and watch my past videos, so I'm actually going to describe everything as if no one has seen any of it ever before. So for you guys who've been following me for this whole time, I apologize, but this is for your own good. So what's happening here is this is your this is your, vocoding setup. It has a carrier and a modulator. What does that mean? Well, a carrier is the primary sound. And it's you put a vocoder, and the modulator is what affects the sound. It changes the sound to give it usually a vocal kind of quality. That's why it's called a vocoder, because in its inception as a thing that people use, it was usually for like Peter Frampton stuff with like voices and instruments. Sometimes they use talk boxes, which I guess are not the same thing, but are kind of the same thing. I'm not really sure. But in any event, that's what I mean when I say carrier and modulator. I will also use that term when I talk about FM synthesis, because the modulator in this particular setup is an FM patch. It's an FM bass that I'm using it to basically have direct control over the format-D vocal modulation of the sound. And I'm doing that in this pattern. Pattern 2 here is the FM patch, and then the X mod here is modulating the FM patch. But I'm not going to talk about that because this actually began with a totally unrelated attempt at making a bass, a sort of like a vocoder bass in just Harmor. And this has to do with that's not even the right patch. This is, okay. So this has to do with what this sounds like by itself. So I'm going to go to Vocodex. I'm going to turn off the wet and turn up the carrier. These are relevant. I'll tell you mine in a second. So what's happening here is I have a sound that this is kind of like a post vocoder, because what's happening is I dropped one of these sounds into Harmor and I resynthesized it additively. I'm not going to go into what additive synthesis is, but just you should be fine with the idea that it puts the audio file in here, and then you can use it like it's a synth. So, I guess I'll just open up a new one and show you what I did. So let's go over here to this modulator. So the carrier in this particular example would be Harmor itself, and then the modulator is going to be this vocal file. So, however, I wanted the vocal file to be a bit lower because Harmor interprets this middle C value, and then how high or low a sound is based on what it how much of it. I'm not actually really sure what it's based on. I'm totally honest. The manual doesn't really cover it. I never really thought to ask any of the devs. I think I should do that someday. But point being, I wanted it to sound a particular way before I put it into Harmor. So here's what the sound originally sounded like.
Oh yeah.
And then I brought it into an Edison. That's this thing. I brought it into Edison, not this one, and then I pitch shifted it. Now, a cool thing about Edison, I should just get rid of this and do it manually. Just edit. So, a cool thing about Edison is that its pitch shifting function is not live. So you can do some cool stuff like format preservation for some of the algorithms that you can use. I picked one, and if I would just disengage the format protection, this is what. Not making a sound. It's because it's probably in a file. It's not making. Yeah. Okay. Just turn it on. There you go. Okay. So.
Oh yeah.
That's what it sounds like normally. And then if I were to just pitch shift it an octave lower, sounds like that. However, if I engage format preservation.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh
you see that you can actually dial in what it's still pitched. It's pitched an octave lower. Pop, 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 pop. It's pitched an octave lower, but you have it preserves the performance so that you can still hear, in terms of vocal content, what he was saying. You know what I mean? But it also is a particular characteristic that I wanted to preserve for its use as a vocal modulator in Harmor. So I did that, and then I got this. And then I ran it through actually this instance here, just to make it sound a little bit more weird, kind of gurgly. And I just ran this through a Vocodex, where if you run a Vocodex on a single source, what ends up happening is that the source becomes the carrier and the modulator. Now, you would think that doesn't really do anything, except for the fact that you can manipulate what the modulator does to the sound by like changing the pitch of the incoming modulator, changing like where the formants are going in the modulator. And that could have a tremendous impact on what the sound sounds like. So then we end up getting this. And I took that. What's this guy? That's this guy. And I dropped it into a new Harmor. So let's take this guy. So this is the new one, right? Yeah. Losing my place. Okay, so go back. Audio clips. Open up. Unsorted. Harmor. Okay. Now it's here. Now, by default, it puts it in there in such a way that when you hit middle C, it will give you back exactly what the sound sounded like. Now we go to the Harmor visualization here. This will actually kind of give you an idea of what Harmor does to resynthesize audio. Now this is an additive synthesizer. So what this means is that it's building the sound out of individual sine waves. All of these lines, they are lines, but all these lines that you're seeing are this is the data that Harmor played in order to make this sound. And it becomes more apparent when I tip the scale. Now this is the frequency scale. And what this did when I brought it down to 0 is that the frequency movement and the identifiable harmonics that it's playing here has been moved down to 0. So that means that all the harmonics are now squashed to 0 values. So this is adhering back to the original additive saw wave sound that Harmor starts with. Which is that. Now I go a step further and I take the sharpness and bring it all the way down. Now you can already kind of see how cool that is. Like that right there, you could use that to do numerous cool things. But now this would be where a normal vocoder would stop. It basically takes the input audio and transposes it onto the carrier audio. But with Harmor, you can mess with it in ways that nothing else ever could. Like, for example, you could have direct control over how, like what part of the audio is playing, even with 0 motion. So as you can see, what's basically doing here is it's scanning the input waveform based on all these sample points, and then it's playing the harmonics based on the gain value, the gain scale, which you can also change. So the gain scale here is basically darkness to light. The lighter values are louder and darker values are quieter. And so here, this other scale knob here is the input image gain pixel scale. Over here is the frequency scale. We already discussed what that did, but the pixel scale, the gain scale, what this does is it determines how far apart in volume the darkness and the light is. So then if I go all the way up, only the most bright is still audible. But if I bring it all the way down, just about everything is audible except for what's not there at all. It's kind of like an interesting compression algorithm. It's like a weird compression type. It's like a visual compression type. But we're not messing with that. So I did that. Now, the other thing that you can do, by default, if you don't engage the formant mix, it'll basically one-to-one transmit the partial data, the reconstructed from the wave scan here, to the pitch. So that's basically what that does. And if I engage formants, pitch will still move around, but the formants are generally kept where they were, so that the formant type is preserved no matter what pitch you're playing. Versus now, I happen to like what it sounded like when it was really low, so I could take the formant and bring it down. It's still not quite low enough though. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the parameters tab. I'm going to open up image formant mutation. Now this is the line by which the formants are moved around. And by default, it's flat. So it moves all formants all the way. However, you can also do this. Doesn't really sound very good because there's not a lot of high frequency definition, but you can change that by moving the higher formants up more. And so there's that. Now, this is more or less what I did with the original sound and this guy here. However, there are some subtle differences. Along with doing what I just showed you originally, I added in a separate part here, which is actually just synthesis. And it adds some high frequency tinge to the whole sound. Because the whole thing is going into its own compression and its own distortion and to kind of glue the sound together. But I didn't really like what it sounded like with just the original sound together. So that sounds kind of cool. Now, I was originally trying to make this as a sound work by itself, and it kind of does. I could see this working, but it wasn't quite clicking with me. I didn't really like what I was doing with it. So I had the thought, what if I vocoded this? Right? Now, actually, my original thought was, what if I vocoded something else with this? But that didn't work out, and so I ended up using an FM patch to vocode this particular patch. And that's what this happened. Yeah, so that's what that sounded like. Hold on. That's what that sounds like without the vocoding. And then with the vocoding. Now, what does the modulator sound like? Oh, what the heck is this? This is a patch that is created as a result of FM synthesis. Now, a lot of you who've been following me, you're probably already very familiar with how this works because I've talked about it just about every time I've ever done a how to bass video. But I'm going to go through it all from the ground up anyway. So, like I said, FM. Now, if you heard that, you're probably thinking, does this mean that you did this with FM8? No, but however you can. And hopefully, after I finish explaining how this works in Citrus, you should be able to translate what I did to make it work in FM8. There's a couple of discrepancies, like, for example, all the operators, as in the operators here, they're all by default on pitch ratio 2. So then when I make a decision like to have one at pitch ratio 64, in order to have the same effect, you want to have it at pitch ratio 32 because FM8 is by default on pitch ratio 1. And so is Harmor, by the way. Not really sure why Citrus was designed like this, but honestly, it doesn't matter. It's just an octave. So, FM synthesis, what does that mean? FM stands for frequency modulation, and synthesis is synthesis. So, like, what this means is that an operator, an operator is defined as a whole slew of things. It's basically a collection of an oscillator plus some parameters and some ASDR, attack, sustain, decay, release. I'm pretty sure I said that right. And pitch values. It's a bunch of values that creates an output. You can just Wikipedia what an operator means. It's FM synthesis is based on very old technology, but so Citrus goes a bit farther than in terms of operators than like something like FM8 does. For example, instead of having a select few waveform types, you can morph through different waveform types. And now this was enough to make it an unbelievably powerful subtractive synthesizer for me for many years before I finally learned what FM synthesis was supposed to actually do. You can also do things like engage TX waveforms types and Also other stuff like tensions and skews and all this stuff and all this craziness. And the most powerful thing, I think, in Citrus is this additive window here. I call it an additive window. What it really is just a big old harmonic oscillator. And you could tell it like to add in additional harmonics, and it can really screw with stuff. And if you drop in a waveform, it'll additively resynthesize the waveform in the sine harmonics. However, we'll do the same thing, by the way. If you drop in a waveform into the timbre section here, timbre, it'll resynthesize it as a single cycle. That'll be cool. So now we're going to discuss what operators are. The way that FM works is that one operator will modulate the frequency of the other based on its frequency. This is why operators' pitches are handled in ratios, and as well as you can also move around in hertz, but it's mostly based on ratios. And this is because you want it all to match up per note, as opposed to just a like hertz value, which will be unchanging and drastically change and probably not be very tonal. If you ever tried FM synthesis without really knowing what you're doing, you probably arrived at lots of very painful sounds. This means still kind of a painful sound, but it's at least a note-driven painful sound. So I have operator 2 modulating operator 1's frequency at the fundamental, which means it's the same modulating tone as the output tone, which would sound like this. It's very loud. Please play bass notes. Now, you can modulate it by moving around these knobs, but you can't automate these knobs. So how do you automate it? Well, the amplitude of modulation from one operator to another is a function of its volume. That is to say, if you wanted to automate how much on FM is happening, I'm just gonna open up this pattern. I also have operator 6 engaged. I'm going to turn it off. Just makes it very simple. So also going to turn off 2 or 3 because it's not. Yeah. Right. That's what it sounds like when you modulate a sine wave by a triangle wave at the fundamental tone. Boy, am I making sense today. Citrus happens to have a built-in system for handling modulation input or modulation amplitude values. And so you don't have to do something like modulate the volume, which is, by the way, a 100% value to negative 100% value because you have positive and negative polarities. I happen to do negative just because I do. Not really, because. So in operator 1, I have the mod tab open, which stands for modulation, and I have modifier, mod X, set up to be the thingy, this knob here, it'd be the thingy that controls the modulation input. And that's what I'm automating in here to make this work. Now, it doesn't really sound like much doing it on its own, so how did the vocal business happen? Well, I have operator 3 going in there at value 64, which is a very high harmonic. I want to show you what that looks like in the EQ because it's really cool. So watch, if I actually took away number 2 here, that's what it sounds like when you have a triangle wave modulating the output operator at the value 64 frequency ratio. A little bit. I don't have it hugely in there because if I did, it would be painful, but it's in there. Now, you saw how there's high frequency, that you can see where the harmonic starts, right? Well, the way that cumulative modulation works is that it doesn't matter which input's going in where, they're basically all mashing together. I'm sure there's some kind of sequence that makes it work, but if you do one and the other or one and another in some different order, it'll still have the same effect. So there's that. So that high harmonic is being spread around in the spectrum, as you saw, based on the fundamental frequency modulating it. If that didn't make any sense to you, it doesn't really matter. All you really need to know is that this setup will create this sound. It's also important to note that I have it set up so that operator 1 is effectively modulating the volume of 2 and 3 And I guess also 4, 5, and 6, but there's no values going in there. So then if you want to do this in FM8, you'd have to automate the volume of 2 and 3, or A and B, individually. Also, you could do it where instead of doing 2 and 3 into the same operator, you could do 2 into 1 and then 3 into 2. You just gotta kind of be careful about how you do it. So you could theoretically only be automating the volume of operator 2, but then have 3 going into operator 2 and B into operator C. So then operator F, which is by default your output operator in FM8, will be doing its job. Now I also have secondary modulation. I have another operator, also a triangle with some funny stuff going on, operating on operator 3. Now, when you see in my tracks, when I usually have X and Y modifiers active on Citrus, when I'm usually controlling is X is the main FM of the output operator, which in this case is operator 1, and Y is usually the input modulation of the high harmonic, because I'm usually doing some kind of extra modulation on the high harmonic. And in this case, I'm just not, because I don't need to. I like how it sounds all the way on. Now, I also have some additional harmonics engaged in operator 3 and 4, and that's to attenuate some of the weirder sounds that happen. And also, operator 4 is slightly out of phase, which is what this bar down here does. This is harmonic amplitude, and this is harmonic phase. So. I got rid of some kind of unwanted ringiness, which is important because this is the modulating operator, the modulating sound in the vocoder. And the ringy sound translates into band movement, which doesn't really sound very good. So I didn't want that. So that is how I made this FM patch. And I hope that made sense to you. Now I had 6 engaged because operator 1 is a sine wave by itself. And if I were to just play, it's a sine wave. But if I bring in, can you hear what I'm saying? If I bring it all the way up, the bassness of it goes away. So I have 6 engaged with the volume with mod X going up. So when mod X is all the way up and FM is all the way on, 6 comes in and replaces the sine value so that there's always a constant sine bass reinforcement in the sound. It's not super important for the its job as a vocoder modulator, but when I use it as its own bass in a song, that's usually what I do to ensure that there's a steady sub reinforcement in the same patch, because I don't like doing external sub reinforcement. I don't. I mean, I probably should, but I don't. So, in the vocoder, the way that Vocodex works is that you determine which input is modulator, which is carrier, and FL Studio, you determine inputs by routing by routing mixer channels into other channels. You can do this by right-clicking route this track only, and now it's routed in there. And anything that can accept a side input will know that there's a channel routed in there, and then you can make it work. And so I know that 2 is a modulator and 1's the carrier. So I right-click this, and there's a list. And like if I were smart and named these would show up in names as well. And you can also do traditional left-right encoding, which is you put them both in there, and then you pan one left to pan one right, and then left or right is the carrier. I forget which. Yeah. So. Oh yeah, not engaging. So, in the Vocodex, I have it pitched just a little bit down, not a whole lot down, because the carrier is already kind of down, and so is the modulator, which is the FM patch. So I don't need to be super duper low, but it's kind of low. What else did I change? In the band distribution, I made it so that it's actually all the way down. By default, it's kind of up, which means that the bands are moved slightly to not have low frequency values that low. But I don't care. I'm having it go all the way down. So there's that. I have additional bands going. By default, it sounded like 47, but I chose to go 62 because I swept it around and eventually sounded good when I was at 62. All of my decisions for what I'm doing were based on dicking around until something sounded good. However, I do know a couple of things, like you know what they do on purpose. And one of these is that this is the bandwidth knob. And this is the bandwidth multiplier. And what this does is that it's basically like saturation. Like all the way over this side, it tries really hard to make the bands fit very cleanly to what the modulator is doing and the EQ spectrum. Because really what Vocoder is doing is it's superimposing an EQ analysis of the input modulation onto the carrier by way of these bands. So then all the way over here, it kind of smooths out the bands. And it'll sound more like the carrier because it's not as effective. It's not as affecting the carrier as much. It basically becomes a slightly more complicated bandpass filter at this point. Kind of dealy. And there's not a whole lot else I'm doing in here. I have a compressor engaged. It's multi-band. And an EQ. There's not a lot going on in these, just making it louder and then making it sound less annoying to my ear, which is what this EQ is doing, which will be different for everyone who ever does anything. I believe I also have a bit of external, I have a compressor going on the carrier, which is the crazy Harmer post vocoder. Resynthesis audio. Terms. I know terms. I'm not going to tell you wrong things and confuse you for the rest of your life. I really try not to do that. Okay. We talked about a whole bunch of shit. I hope that everything I told you made sense, and I hope that you have learned ways to make cool basses, if you want to. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will try to answer them. And as usual, have a nice day. Thank you for watching. Also, don't forget that I'm doing a remix competition. If you weren't aware of this, you can go into my channel video lists, and 2 or so videos ago, there's an announcement for a remix competition for one of my tracks. First place's prize is $200, which I'm paying from my own pocket. Some prizes from ImageLine, such as the option to have a free copy of FL Studio or Decadence 2 DVS edition. If you already own these, you can have that translated into IL cache, and you can use it to buy plugins or whatever from ImageLine store. In addition to that, you also have the option of a free plugin of your choice from the ImageLine store. You can do something like buy Harmer if you don't have Harmer. Or you can, even if you don't actually use FL Studio, if you win this, and you can convert it to IO cache. And a lot of these are available as VSTs that you can use in other programs. Like Harmer is available as a VST, Vocoder is available as a VST, Edison is available as a VST, Citrus. Everything that I've used in this track so far, it's not even a track. Everything I've used in this project is available as a VST, and you can use it in other PC-based DAWs, digital audio workstations. Or if you're brave, you can use crossover, parallels, some kind of wrapper you can use in Mac-based environments that convert, that let you use VSTs in a predominantly AU or RTAS environment, or whatever else Mac-based plugin formats are. I don't know anything about that because I had never used a Mac for this purpose. Second place is the same deal. You get free FL. Don't believe you have the option to Decadence. There's a list. I have a list in the video. All the winners, there's 3 winners. All of them will also have their winning track promoted on my channel, which is I guess if it's valuable to you, then yay. Also, the first place winner gets a collaboration with me, which I hope is valuable to you. That's why it's first place. Yeah. Anyway, yes. If you have any question, ask me. I'll let you know answers if I know them. And as usual, have a nice day. I've said that once already, but I'll say it again because now I'm actually ending.